Nigeria is in the middle of a major tax reform phase with new and amended tax acts aimed at improving revenue generation, widening the tax net, and strengthening compliance. But while these laws look good on paper, implementation remains a major challenge. Businesses, tax authorities, and ordinary Nigerians are still trying to understand what these changes really mean, how they affect daily operations, and whether they will ultimately support growth or add more pressure to an already strained economy. Well, joining us this morning to help us unpack this conversation is Oladejo Adeyemi. He's a partner at Anderson and he joins us on Big Story this morning. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you this morning.
Same here.
Well, let's start with the big picture and what Nigerians are really curious about. Nigerians are still not sure about what the objectives of what the tax Nigeria's recent tax is and really what we're trying to address with the recent tax act. So could you try to break this all down for us?
Okay, I think it is not surprising first that Nigerians are kind of not sure or not certain as to what the objectives are, because this is the first time in history that we're having this level of overall, across our taxing legislation and even, across the entire regime that we've had. So it's not quite surprising at all. What the government is trying to do is, one of the major objectives, there are a couple of objectives that the acts have specified, but one of the major objectives first is to eradicate the prolific nature of the different acts that we've had in the past. You've had the Value Added Tax Act, you had the Personal Income Tax Act, you have the Companies Income Tax Act, you have the Stamp Duty. So we had many acts such that as a regular Nigerian or a citizen, ordinary citizen, you're not a practitioner, you're not familiar with those laws. Even if you had wanted to comply, it might be a bit challenging for you to do so. So part of the things the government wanted to do was to consolidate all of the tax laws such that it will be easier, compliance will be easier for a lot of Nigerians. And then another thing is to ensure that we have more people participating within the tax net. So we had huge population, but we've not had that reflects in our tax to GDP ratio. So what the government then thought to do is to see how those provisions would change in a way and manner that would be favorable to a lot of Nigerians and also reflect what global best practices are. Some of the laws we've had in the past, they have just been, they are archaic. They were no longer in tune with current economic realities. What the government has done is just to make those adjustments to be able to reflect what the realities now look like. So essentially, in a short recap, that is what the government is trying to do.
Right. And from your experience, what would you say is the gap that you've seen in the taxes that this recent tax act and what they intend to achieve and what's currently happening?
Okay, so I think one major challenge that the government has encountered, even though they did attempt to mitigate against it, and I'll tell you what the mitigating strategy was before implementation commenced. It was the first time you had the acts or reform, the laws were signed into act on the 26th of June by the president, and they deliberately delayed implementation for the major acts to 1st of January. That's about 6-month window. That's the first time, that you have a law and the government is deliberately delaying for that long. And part of the delay, what I believe must have necessitated such delay is to ensure you have heightened level of stakeholder engagement. But what I think the government didn't see coming is the level of misunderstanding and misconception that could attract all of these intentions, and all of that. So they've been huge level of misunderstanding. Sometimes you go online, you see people just turning everything downside up, and then you see people blaming government for a provision that appears favorable, if you were a practitioner or if you understood what the government was trying to do. For instance, you've had people say, first 800,000 income that you've earned for the whole year, if you are earning 800,000 and below as your taxable income, not even your gross income, your taxable income, you're not going to pay tax. We've never had something like that before, to say, oh, let us exempt people that are earning this much income. So how should that kind of provision upset anyone? You understand what I'm trying to say? But you see people set up ring lights, and just say this is what it is, turn things around. And that is the part that the government really, probably didn't see coming, despite the level of engagement and the level of clarifications, that they kind of sent out there before the full implementation. So if there be any major bottleneck or any major gap, it is the gap between what the people have known to be their truth before the tax laws and what the tax laws are now saying their truth will be. So bridging that gap together, it's has posed a lot of challenge, to the
just
government.
before we talk about this implementation, which oftentimes is the hardest part of reform itself, but let's talk about, you did mention the 800,000 naira earnings and how it's taxable and all of that. Could you break that down for our viewers today who may need to understand really what is taxable and what's not taxable?
Okay, with the personal income tax, what the government is saying is, if you are the objective is to exempt the poorest of the poor among us from issue of income tax. Your earnings aren't quite significant enough. Let's not overburden you with tax. Reasonable, you would say. So what that means is, if your taxable income is not more than 800,000 naira for an entire year, not for a month, not for two, but for a whole year, the tax rate applicable to you is 0%.
Okay.
And when you multiply anything by 0, it comes back at 0. So it means that you will not pay tax on that income. Now, people have mistaken that 800,000 to mean 800,000 per month. Some people have said 800,000 is gross income, the total inflow that came into your account. No. So you could even have, depending on the reliefs that will be available to you, you could have as high as 1.2 million as your gross income. But if your taxable income, the portion that should go to the taxable, through the taxable, is not more than 800,000 in a year, then you have no income tax to pay. So that's the clarification.
And that portion is just basically your salary, is it?
Absolutely.
So if you get some more money, that obviously is more than 800,000 in a year and all of that, you're still not going to get any tax.
So the way it's supposed to work is, an individual, the tax is on entities or individual. So an individual may have multiple sources of income. The paid employment, where he gets salary from, may be one source. If he does other things that gives him other things that give him income, then he has to factor those other things in. While he would say that for that income, for instance, the employer would say, oh, this income is not up to the band that should pay tax. If I subject this income to tax, it's going to be at 0%. The other income that the person has earned must be reported by the individual, right? And duly taxed. Those ones are separate from that employment income. So it's a case of you having a business or you being an entity looking at what are the things I earned all through the year. What type of tax should apply on the things I earn? What is the obligation of for instance, if you earned salary from paid employment, it is not in your place to deduct the tax. It is in the place of your employer to do the calculation and pay the tax.
At the end of the year?
At the end of every month. Yes, there's an obligation on your employer to calculate, and that's why those in paid employment receive their income net of taxes. Nobody gets gross of their income. So the employer would, and at some point in the year, it's January, all employers would then report all that they have paid and deducted, all that they've paid to the employees, deducted from the employees as tax and paid to the government as tax to the government. There's a reporting period for that to happen. But every individual also has obligation to file tax returns, at designated time of the year. It has always been March. So at the point where that individual is then filing his returns, what he has earned from paid employment plus any of the other income he has gotten from those other sources will then be added together. He will then determine what his taxes would be and pay, depending, of course, on the structure of those things that have given him the other income. That's how it works.
I think one more thing people are really curious about is also, so there been conversations about, at the end of the year you're supposed to now file the taxes, but then you are also talking about March as the designated time.
Yes. So the tax that you're going to pay would follow who you are, or what structure do you have. If you're an individual, or if you're a company, if you have individuals that have incorporated companies, sometimes people have businesses trading under business name. Right. If you trade under business name, the legal structure of your business is that you and your business, you are one and the same. If you trade using through a limited liability company has a legal status, right? It's a juristic person. That's the language of the law. So the company it can sue and be sued. The company is separate and distinct from you. So it is the income of that company that is going to be taxed. But for an individual, if you have businesses that you are doing, but you are doing the business under a business name, it is like you are the one earning income, you are the one trading through that business name. So you and that business name arrangement, you are the same. And the way it works is for companies will file tax returns after their year end. Companies are like persons. They file tax returns after their year end at designated period, depending on the year end that the company has selected. But individuals are required to also file their tax returns. Every individual in Nigeria is required to file tax returns. The reason is strange to a lot of people is because most people don't do it.
Don't do that.
Exactly. Most people have not been doing it. Most people don't even know about it. They just believe that, especially those in paid employment, they just believe that whatever my taxes are, my employer had deducted the taxes and remitted to the government. I have no further obligation to perform. So in a case where you don't have, because the reality of most people in paid employment is that because they don't have any other income to declare, they believe that the obligation that the employer had performed on them, right, or on their behalf, is sufficient. But that does not take away the provision of the law that requires every individual to still file tax returns.
Right. And are there any means to hold people accountable in that sense? Because if you're seeing the case of many, I'm telling you, many people are guilty of this, of not, filing taxes because you just feel like your employer has already done that. Yeah. So is there some sort of way to hold people more responsible? Also, can you clarify something? You're seeing what has been going on all around social media, where people are talking about narrations and then saying things like, people make payment and write gifts, like so many things, and then like this year it means a lot of us are going to be giving each other gifts. Can you clarify what it is about this narration thing?
Okay, I think that's another huge misconception that has been widespread, right? You cannot, by narration, avoid taxes or evade taxes. One cannot use narration to change the substance of a transaction. What the narration is supposed to do is to provide clarifications, because Nigeria operates a taxing regime that is based on self-assessment. What that means is you are the one that would assess yourself to tax and pay, whether as a company or as an individual. So when you assess that tax, the tax authorities would review what you have filed, what you have disclosed, and agree or disagree to it. So if you don't assess yourself or do anything, then the tax authority also have provisions that can make them then come for you and say, come explain yourself. So at the point where you are engaging with the tax authority, whether because you did not file anything, you did not disclose anything, or you disclose something that they don't agree with, that is where the issue of such narration would help. Because it would then be a case of, okay, what are this inflow that you've received? If you say you didn't receive any income in 2025 was a bad year, but you traveled out with a family of 5 3 times during the year, and it was a bad year, and we're just saying gift in your bank account, then they would ask you to confirm. Of course, when the narration tends to unreasonableness, it becomes a problem. Then the tax authorities would have to set aside whatever it is you have done and determine what your income is and determine what your tax should be. So people that are, and that's why I said that's another huge misconception. You cannot, in fact, what it does for you is it would weaken your explanation or defense in the event that those transactions are now, you now have real transactions that are gifts, because there is a case of, oh, that's how you normally do. We've seen that you had gift from January to December, so where you now really had a genuine gift, it would definitely be disputed that it wasn't gift after all, maybe it was income. So it's a very disadvantageous move for anyone who wants to do that. It's like you are saying you never made any income, but you are in service, you're in a line of service, and then everybody is just gifting you things. I like to be. Are you a Father Christmas?
Thank you for clarifying that, because I've seen that circulate all over social media. People are just talking about gifts. Even businesses we're actually telling people to, please, in your narration, please put widows and children home. I've seen a lot of things actually, and I think that it's also a little bit, aside from the moral side of things, that it's not a genuine way to go about things. It's also a little bit misleading. But let's talk about how prepared businesses, particularly the small and medium enterprises, how prepared are they to actually comply to these changes that we're seeing?
Okay, I think anyone who has any business SME who has followed remember that this thing just didn't come upon us. The committee that battered this tax laws was instituted in 2023. They worked for 2 years. We had the bills, flying around for those 2 works. There were a lot of contentious issues. The governor forums weighed in. They were when it passed the first reading. So any business who has actually been following the story or the development should have started taking certain steps. Now, when the laws were then signed into Act of the Parliament by the President on the 26th of June, that should also have become some certainty to any serious-minded business to say things are going to change. Then after that, the government then delayed for another 6 months. So there is expectedly supposed to be sufficient timeline for anyone who truly wants to comply or start doing things differently to have jumped on that ship. But what you find in reality is that, Nigerians sometimes we like last minute, stuff. And it's not just peculiar to Nigerians. These are issues that happen across the globe. Human beings are human beings everywhere, whether your color is white, or black. You are human. So everyone wants to see what is going to happen if I don't do it. And as people begin to see the seriousness that government, and you recall that some days to the end of the year, for instance, there were pandemonium around, oh, this is not the version, this is the version, the lawmakers raised, there's a particular honorable that raised the fact that, oh, this is not the final version, this is not the version we passed. And people were waiting for the signal of the president. What will he do this time around? Will he say, oh, we are giving it another 3 months? In which case, we would have come forth as Nigerians indeed, that, oh, we will never be ready anyway.
Exactly.
But the president, was very brave to say, we acknowledge the inconsistencies or whatever. It won't be perfect, but this is a one-time in a lifetime opportunity that the country is having, and we're going to take the bull by the horn, and we would move forward. Sometimes last week now, we just saw some new copies. Don't ask me how those copies came by, but we just saw some new copies of the law, and those copies now are what people are holding as the final copy, because the copies have the signature of the president and has, everything that should give it that authenticity. So we are a peculiar people, but we also have peculiar ways of solving our problems. So I believe that SMEs that have not come on board to start doing things differently by now should start doing so. The government is quite serious about what they are saying. There's also the other end of the stick on terms of accountability on the part of the government. Someone has engaged me and said, Oladejo, you are just saying, this thing, educating people. What about the government side? How do we ensure that the government becomes accountable with the spending? How do we ensure that the government, deploys this tax revenue, for basic amenities like power and things that have been suffering the people? And the way I look at it is, we've had many problems. The government is saying, let's start from solving this problem this way. And someone rightly said, because your participation was low in the past, you could look away. Now that your participation will be heightened, it will be difficult for you to look away. You would actually demand more from the government and ask for the clarifications on how the money has been spent.
But that's actually really true. Another thing that people are also not aware about is the fact that it's now NRS, not FIRS. I'm still seeing, as young people make use of social media a lot. That's where they get most of their information from. Still seeing many of them saying FIRS every other day. But there are also concerns about overlapping taxes and also the frequent, amendments and creating confusion, really. How serious is this problem, and how does it affect compliance and investor confidence?
Okay, I think one of the major objectives that the government wanted to achieve, with this reform is to really resolve the issues of this multiplicity of taxes. At some point, the committee had said they had maybe about 71 different taxes, and yeah, in Nigeria, and they've merged a lot of things together. One of the things they did, for instance, all of the levies like Naseni, police trust fund, they merged everything together into one levy called development levy and charge it at 4%. So there've been a lot of merging, repealing of certain things have changed to ensure those multiplicities are not subsisted. Nevertheless, because you've had some people that have been around the structure, that have built livelihood around it, you might still find some challenges here and there. So what I'm saying is, just like the issue of NRS and FIRS, till today, do you know when EKDC, IBDC, when NEPA changed all of those? Till today, there are Nigerians that still refer to those people as NEPA. So my point is, it's not going to happen overnight. We would have those challenges, but the fact that we now have new things to point at, to say this no longer exists, this is what now obtains, would make the old beginning to fade away, and then over time everyone is going to be on alignment with what the new is, and we will all move on from there. So that would be my remark on that.
Okay, and where does technology actually come to play here in improving tax compliance and the administration itself? Are we doing enough in the technological area?
I think technology is the backbone of all that, all the assurances and seriousness that the government is putting into this. A couple of weeks ago, you must have seen that the government signed an MOU with France, and everywhere went berserk to say, what are you doing? What are we looking for? And all of that. So I'm saying that government knows. If you also look at some provisions in Chapter 6 of the Nigeria Tax Act dealing with value-added tax, you would see e-invoicing initiative, fiscalization. The government is saying every invoice that you send from one company to the other, if you already cross a threshold of 5 billion, I want to be a part to that. That should happen on my platform, which is the MBS platform. So I think the government has done a lot to put technology as the backbone of this. And when that happens, when you can do a lot of data mining, you can extract information. You can say you bought a new car last year, but you said last year was a bad year. But we saw that you bought a 250 million naira vehicle, and it was indeed a bad year. Oh, we can't correlate between the two things you are saying. So when the government is able to do all of that, people will be able to realistically and willingly come into the compliance net. What we've had before is a situation where our population wasn't mirroring what we were contributing when you look at our tax to GDP ratio. And the government has been ambitious, and we just should hope that the works that would follow, the works that would come after will follow that ambition. But the government has indeed shown a lot of strides with respect to technology deployment and reliance on technological frameworks.
Right, and speaking about this government and the ambition that you've spoken about and their strides, which you also are alluding to, there are some critics who believe that the government is prioritizing revenue generation as against fairness. What are your What's your opinion on this view?
You see, everywhere in the world, the issue of tax, if you go to sophisticated and more developed countries, even though their citizens see the amenities, they have power for 24 hours, they have road networks, they have, train system, they have alternatives, and all of that. When you engage them, you find that they will still say the taxes are high. So the issue of tax, I don't think there will ever be a time someone asked, oh, do you think the government should have deployed all of this time? People are going through it. And I asked the person, I said, in the past 2 years that the government had taken over, just imagine, when do you think would have been a best time? When would have been the best time to have implemented this? Or talk about fuel subsidy. When would have been the best time to have removed fuel subsidy? So what I would say is, if we wait until we are ready, we will probably wait for the rest of our lives, which is what the government is doing, to say, hey, everything is not going to be perfect, but I'm going to move, regardless. So on that basis, I feel there's a lot of commitment that has gone out, on the part of the government, and they are also hearing, they are also seeing the reactions. They are seeing the reactions, they are making changes. There was a time they tried to engage social media experts, some guys that have their blogs and all of that, to say, the committee was trying to say, okay, we'll put you up together, we'll train you. Some of them declined, some of them are. So these are unconventional approaches and models that the government has deployed towards ensuring that these reforms are properly embraced, by the people.
Yeah. And final word of advice for businesses and taxpayers who are trying to navigate these times, especially to stay compliant. What will you say to this?
What I would say is, yesterday ended last night. There's a new sheriff in town. The tax laws are brand new, and do not think your regular processes or practices should just continue. I think this is the time for you to review your books, keep your records properly, include your appropriate narration, not ambiguous or unreasonable or absurd ones, and just keep your profile straight. Because the issue of the taxman coming is not if they come, it is a matter of when they come, because they will certainly come. It's just a matter of time.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Oladejo Adeyemi, partner at Anderson, for joining us on The Big Story today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth,
It was
for having me.
insightful. Well, that's been The Big Story right here on the Business Day Television Breakfast Show.